It's back to school season again. What should we do this year to make sure that our families, our teachers, and our students are prepared to have the best year of their life? We're going to talk about it today with a very special guest, Dr. Cole, on Freedom Friday. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free. Well, good morning, friends and family. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with Sharif El-Mekki, Dr. Cole, and me. We are welcoming you into this conversation. Today, we're going to talk about back to school. I am amongst the people in the country that have one of the latest back to school. So this last week was back to school for me. Some of you have already been in school for a little while, whatnot. But what I wanted to talk about today is since it's the beginning of a school year, let's get at it at the beginning, because we're going to be talking about education all year anyways. So this is at the beginning of it. We should plan to have a great year. We should plan to do the best that we can. We should plan to make sure, listen, people always say that, what's the cliche? Planning to fail or failing to plan or whatever, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? If we don't have a plan for this year or whatnot, we're just going to be watching news headlines this year and next year and not 100% knowing, being at the mercy of the elements. And we don't want that. We don't want that for our kids or our educators or our families. So, fellas, welcome. We got Sharif El-Mekki. We got Charles Cole. We got Miss Gurity in Philadelphia being the first one to jump in. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to Philadelphia. We appreciate y'all for jumping in. Please share the show. Send it out to other people. Get them involved. Dr. Cole, thank you for showing up today. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. Happy to be here. It's good to see you boys. I like the new gig, Sharif. It's you're no longer being held hostage, and we need to come save you.
I like my little cozy wood panel space. You know what I mean? Like this is where I come to read. Not
for the professor. This looks professorial.
It looked like he stepped out of the 1970s and the 2000s. That's what it looks like.
Just like one of those movies where they take a couple steps, then they in another joint. Yeah.
It's like, Sharif is the star of the Black Partridge Family. Cool. Didn't know that.
It looks like he went from Good Times to the Cosby Show. That's what it looks like.
There you go.
He went from Good Times to the Cosby Show. You moving on up.
We skipped George and Wheezy totally. It's all good. We did.
Well, listen, fellas, there have been headlines this week and the last couple of weeks, just what you would expect about our children, about young Black people at the mercy of education, at the education system. Like one clear example of that, in Florida, a principal has now resigned after a couple of weeks ago, pulling all the Black students into an assembly to talk to them about their low test scores. And the principal gave them a big lecture, just the Black kids, just pulled the Black kids. It wasn't just about low test scores. It was about Black people, because they put all the Black kids in a room. Mm-hmm. And she went through all the stats around you can go to jail type of thing, whatever. And what was interesting about it was that some of the students in that room were Black, but they didn't have low test scores. Right. And then there was white students in that school that had low test scores, but they weren't in that assembly. Right. So this is Florida. Of course, it's Florida. And that to me is it's symbolic of watch out, because this isn't 100% for you. But as we start this year, we're going to see more headlines like that. 2 days ago, one of the most crushing stories I saw was young Black student, I think 12 or 13 years old, was run to death in PE. He was complaining. It was very hot. He wasn't feeling well. He didn't have the appropriate clothes for PE that day. And apparently the coach or the educator or whoever just told him to run and keep running and whatever. And that child died. It is no longer with us. These are just two stories, and I could keep going with the number of headlines that we have where Black children are at the wrong end of the justice scale when it comes to education. But we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about back to school, because there are 8 million Black children, as we always say, going into schools this year. That means there's at least 16,000 Black parents that have to worry about what their kids are going to face for this year. And instead of worrying, maybe we just have a plan. So Dr. Cole, I want to bring you in because we only have you for half of the show today. And you know, I think a good place to bring you in on this question of back to school, there's a few things that you say that I think are good building blocks for us as we think about a plan for this year. One of them is you always say, I wish I could just convince my people that they deserve better, right? That feels like a good foundational place to have a cornerstone to start with. You also talk a lot about like tips on what parents should do when they go in to talk to the teacher, like get that relationship started early and whatever. So let's start there. Can we talk about, first of all, just your idea around, let's just all believe that we deserve better?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of guilt that just kind of, you know, with the parents that I work with and the communities that I came from, and even my own parents, like that somehow if your kid is getting really poor education, that it's somehow like you deserved it. Like you should just be happy that that's happening. And I just tell parents, look, regardless if you got a PhD or you know got a 6th grade education, there's still this promise that's been made to your kids about education. And so a lot of the work that I do, man, it probably starts, all 3 of us are social workers. That was one of the things that bonded us before. But that psychological work, I got to work on that before we even start talking about some of the stuff at the school, because how you see yourself is gonna dictate how other people see you, and that's gonna pass on to your kids. So if you think this the best you could do and you don't deserve no better, then you ain't gonna say that my bread is moldy. And baby, you get moldy bread, and you don't deserve that regardless of what you did in your life. So in the type of work that I do, and I don't think that that's just low income parents. I think that that's parents in, you know, middle class, upper class, whatever the case is. You gotta demand better, and you gotta be okay demanding better. So,
you know, along those lines, you just said something to Sharif and Charles. You know, I want to just dispel the myth that you just said, something that we say. Let's stop pretending that middle class parents have it all figured out.
Right.
Let's stop pretending that it's just the downtrodden, you know, parents that don't know enough or whatever. We're just going to dispense with that right at the beginning. Because middle class Black parents, if you are listening to this or watching this right now, I just want to tell you, here's my message for you. You ain't out of the woods. I don't care where you moved, what district you're in, what school you think you got.
Facts.
You are not out of the woods. And if you are not paying attention, attention will pay it to you. Something's going to happen, right? Because I always say 50% of our kids are in the suburbs now, and we don't talk about them, right? They are having an experience right now that isn't the promised land. So watch out. Sharif, what would you say about this, convincing our people that we deserve better?
I mean, both of you are right. I mean, I think sometimes middle class parents sometimes trust systems even more, you know, because they may feel like it worked for them, but that does not mean that it actually did, and it certainly doesn't mean it's going to work for your children. And as far as like what Cole said, you know, he reminded me of like what Mama Asada Shakur used to say, that, you know, people get used to anything. And the less that you think about your oppression, even in the educational space, the less you think about it, the more you get used to it, the more your tolerance for it grows, right? It's that what's that analogy? They say the frog in the boiling water, as it warms up, doesn't even recognize it. Yeah. And so after a while, people just think oppression is the normal state of things, right? And so at some point, like the system is saying, you basically get the education that, you know, your parents can afford. And if you're Black, even if you can afford, it doesn't mean anything. And we see that with all the Blacks at Tony schools, like super exclusive, wealthy schools. And so you can look up in these campaigns, Black at School. And there are a lot of wealthy schools, expensive schools. Parents can afford to send them to these $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year high schools. And the kids are like, yo, this experience is absolutely racist and undermining my education, undermining my whole psyche and positive sense of self. So, yeah.
On this note, I just want to say for listeners and watchers, when Sharif just talked about at school, there was a campaign on Instagram where Black students in different types of schools were running whole campaigns to talk about what their lives were like in those schools. They were talking about all the things that happened to them just to expose it. And it was like, you know, Black at Harvard, you know, or Black at, just fill in the gap with the kind of school. And they were all having experiences that we don't want our young people to have. Charles, I want to go back to you because I started.
You know, Cole, I mean, just Stu, just before you go, and folks who are listening, like, you can actually go Google the private schools, the magnet schools, the Ivy Leagues in your area, the universities in your area, and put blacks at, and just Google just to get a taste of it. Because sometimes I think that generational disconnect, like, oh, we made it, we're all right, you know, you're all right, like you arrive to the private land or the whatever they're called, promised
land, yeah.
And so I don't have to think about it anymore. Like, and the kids may not come home and tell because they know you to sacrifice a lot, or you might not even want to hear it, or you might tell me to toughen up or whatever. Like, or they just know that you're so stressed out with a bunch of other things. But just do that research of just seeing how Black kids are experiencing K-12 as well as college. Sorry, just wanted to give homework there.
Yeah. So two things I want to pull Dr. Cole in on. So we started with this, you deserve better. We need, I think, to transition to agency. You talk a lot about thinking like an agentic person, Charles. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But, you know, I want to also put some scholarship on the table that we don't usually do. So last year, I think it was last year, year before, Charles, you were knee deep in some stuff like Akbar and some other couple of books. And I would just love for you to interject their voice into this conversation in any type of way. Like, I don't want to put you on the spot. Yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot. But like, what's the main idea of those books and that scholarship that we should interject into a conversation like this?
Yeah, I love Akbar. I always got an Akbar book on me, man. I'm like Sharif in that regard. He was a Black psychologist, and there's a school of these kind of old school Black education people, but they knew that education was the way they were going to help transform the Black community to get us to where we need to be. And he does a lot of work around yourself, like knowing yourself, knowledge of self, the community itself, understanding those things, breaking those psychological chains of slavery. And that's really what Sharif was just talking about. And so anytime like Akbar comes up, you should look at his books, because one, they like 70 pages, but they're very clear on what he means about your worth, your value. Also, when you don't know your history. So when Florida is attacking African-American studies or things like this to further erase your history, it all adds, it all goes into the pot. Now, look, I grew up as somebody who thought that all the men in his family only, drugs and jail and all this stuff, right? I didn't know that, my family helped to settle this area, right? I actually learned that with Chris. We were looking at something together. I didn't know about my parents and the Black Panthers and growing up in the same neighborhood as all these people. But the point that I'm ultimately making is, when you know that you come from greatness, it changes your mindset. If I knew what I came from, there's a lot of dumb things I wouldn't have did. I'm not even just going to say in my teens, in my 20s and 30s, if I had truly known who I was. So when you say interject Akbar, it is just basically this understanding of who we are as a people, what we have come through, what is programmed in your DNA, the positive things in that. And once you know those things, your body, your mind, and your soul won't allow you to accept certain things. But when you feel like you downtrodden and you cursed and you just a damned group of people, then it is easier to let things happen to you. That is hopefully I did not fail Dr. Akbar in the spirit of what his writings and teachings tend to be about.
And that's a good precursor to your other idea that you talk a lot about, agency. Like, if you don't feel like, if you don't live mentally in the downtroddenness, the awfulized part of things, then you can feel a lot more agentic. Absolutely. And by agentic, folks, don't let me be up here using fancy words. That's not something I say. That's something Dr. Cole says.
It is.
That's one of them $69 words that Dr. Cole likes to agentic.
I say agentic. My grandmother, my older Christian grandmother would have said discernment. You know what I'm saying? Sharif might say knowledge of self or Ubuntu. Like, there's a lot of different things, right? But it's like, listen, there's a process. There's a way in which, we are pushing on a system that is oppressive, that is not built for us, that is harmful to us. And at the same time, we are doing things for the self. We are making sure and doing everything that's possible to make sure that we're setting up our kids, our families, our communities for success. It is not this convoluted kind of political warfare thing that's happening where it's like, it's either this or it's either that. It's like, no, these things are all happening. That is why Sharif has his wife and his daughters are writing books and they out there making honey and chickens, but he also is fighting a system every single day trying to build something. It is why Chris Stewart now has kids through 3 different or 4 different decade periods at this point. Like that, it is why he went through that what he went through, and he learned from each kid down. So now, when you call his youngest kid lethargic, he got words and responses and power to come back at you. But maybe 30 years ago, maybe with that first kid, he didn't have those words. He built that up over time. That is being agentic. It is saying that I'm not excusing the systemic issues that are happening, but at the same time, while pushing on those, I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure, like, I'm going to do research and know my teachers' names. I'm going to make sure that I call up there. I'm going to make sure I have a goal. I'm going to ask them what should my kid know at the end of this semester, and how do we check it? I'm going to check in on that teacher and let them know that I'm a partner of theirs and I want to be in partnership, but you also have my most precious asset. And if you cross that line, then there's a different me that you're going to have to deal with. That is what agency is. And sorry for that long-winded explanation, but I do see a lot of people using it commercially to push an ideology, when the only ideology should be leading you to righteousness and making sure your kids got what they need.
Yeah, I think just to point out, when you said the lethargic part, for people listening, you don't know the background on this story, but the short version of it is there was a teacher, one of the teachers that called one of my kids lethargic, and it pissed me off, and I still remember it, and it's been years, and I still remember it now, because she happened to be talking about the particular child that I have multiple kids that have different personalities. This one's pretty funny. He's like funny and witty and clever and observant. So there's a lot of words you could use for him. So when she used lethargic, it was like this ringing gong in my ear that set off all my black maleness, and I haven't forgotten it since. I'm not nearly as agentic as Sharif. I'm not out there like tending to bees and like, eating crickets and, like finding protein where there's not supposed to be protein and all that type of stuff, right? Sharif reminds me of the type of person, if we ever had the end of the world, he would be the most prepared and
we're
ready.
Gonna be off the grid one day. When I'm done, I'm just like, you know what? I'm gonna hand off the baton to the next gen totally, and I'm gonna be off the grid, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Your kids will be ready. My kids will be out there like,
some of them might abandon me. We're like, nah, Dad, this is as far as we go.
My kids.
I think them girls. I think Sharif would say them girls gonna be ready. I don't know if he feels that way about his oldest, but I think.
The baby girls are gonna be ready.
Girls is ready.
Yeah, they're ready right now. As a matter of fact, they give him a run for the money. Sharif, you have run a school. You've been an educator for a long amount of time now. And when you think about starting school this year and arming our parents with just kind of the intellectual tools and maybe I don't even physical tools or whatever to get started this year, to be like an active player in their kid's life, what's the least fancy things that you think we could say for parents? Just the most viable product of advice for parents that are going to be starting this year. They're going to be working. They're going to be busy. School isn't going to be all that they do every day. So what would be your advice for them?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is just letting school staff and reminding your child what your expectations are. I think that's the fastest way to start conversations, communications, as well as accountability, collective work, responsibility, and accountability. Reminding your child, like, hey, here's what I expect, as far as, how you represent the family. Here's what I expect when you feel that you're disrespected, in different scenarios, right? And the same way with staff. Hey, here's how I prefer to be communicated with. Here's, whether it's texting, whether it's phone, whether it's email, here's what I expect, and then having those type of conversations, I think, and don't wait for back to school night. Like, do that beforehand. Don't wait for the, a lot of times people are, they kind of tell this narrative like the staff is the first ones who reach out, like, oh, when y'all call home to, like, you don't have to wait for a teacher to call you. Like, your child is in that class, like, go meet them, go talk to them, send them a message. So I would say the first thing is like communicating. It's almost like, how they say like a elderly in a hospital or in an old folks home, the one that people feel like don't have like that advocate, they are at most at risk. Right? Like, if that elderly person, they're in a retirement home and no one comes to visit them, no one checks on them, no one is making noise, they are the most at risk for other people's heinous behavior. And unfortunately, our children are just as vulnerable when people don't know that there's someone that's riding for them. And it doesn't mean like riding, there's no one there, like they don't have their, you know, I'm not talking about like orphaned or just home. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just someone that's the advocate, the strong voice and advocate that's checking on how they're experiencing school. Right, not just the grades, right? Because if you're just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna check on the grade, that could be quarterly, you know. No, I'm interested and I'm advocating for the best experience possible in while they're in school. That's 180 something days. That's 7 hours a day. That's 13 years.
Mm.
That person has to be known and well known, not just by that teacher and the principal, by other staff as well.
Mm. All right, I'm gonna throw a real world problem at both of y'all. And y'all gonna give me guidance on this, right? So so my baby girl, you know, the last child that I have is a girl, and she's the only girl in the family. So this is my last parenting kind of shot here, and she's attending a school this year, a middle school, where they limit the number of times you can use the bathroom during the day to 2. And if you have to go a third time, whatever, God help you, because you can't. There's a person standing right outside the bathrooms. They took all the mirrors out of the bathrooms. You can no longer use your phone during lunch. And during lunch, you can no longer sit with your friends. You have assigned seatings. And they are just year over year, they are adding more things to make things more restrictive in an attempt to make behavior management more efficient, right? Not for the kids, but for the schools. Now, I don't like to, just I want to be real. I don't want to lie to people. I'm not the one who always interacts with the schools. My wife does. My wife does a lot of that work. And I think part of that is because she doesn't always want me involved in everything. Like I'm the nuclear option, I think, on some of these things, right? So I'm laissez-faire. I sit back. But these things are getting more and more restrictive. And I don't feel like necessarily I have a voice, because what I'm going to do, we go to the school board and start saying, listen, y'all starting to make the school like a starter prison, right? No mirrors in the bathroom. You can, oh no, let me make it even worse. This is going to make it even worse. They have an incentive program where you can get a slip that gives you perks in the school. You get more perks. So the so-called good kids get this like ID card, and it has to be signed off by all your teachers and a counselor. And once you get them all to sign off on it, saying that you're a good kid, you have good behavior, then you get some benefits. Here are 2 of the benefits. One is you get to use the bathroom more throughout the day, right?
So you only gotta you gotta earn.
You gotta earn the right to poop, right? So and then one of the other perks is that you get more recess time or whatnot. So Charles, you know, we talk about and you too, Sharif, because you run a school. We talk about these things like agency and being agentic or whatnot, but that comes with the language and action. And it sounds good when I say like I'm an agentic parent, because I feel like Chris Stewart has been through some things, and I kind of am. But to tell you the truth right now, I don't have the agentic language to say, I want you to change the system for my child, because I think it's ridiculous that it's a reward to be able to go to the bathroom, or it's a reward to have recess.
Well, now you in a term of much needed civil disobedience. I had, you know, my mother, and Vita put this in the comments, but my mother did the same thing. I had a school that told us, you know, hey, if they tell you can't go to the bathroom, I will take you getting in trouble for that. Like when my parents gave me permission to like that I can go to the bathroom and I'll be okay, then I went. It sounded like that school got a lot of other things that's going on. But I don't know what y'all PTA means, the parent, you know, all that stuff looks like. But I think if certain things are just unfair, I mean, this is why education is actually important. Civil disobedience, like this is the time to actually break this rule, and let's have a deeper conversation about it. I think that parents should have real conversations with their kids. I think you already told your daughter, if you got to go to the bathroom and you really got to go, and you go, and tell them to call your daddy or tell them to call your mama. Don't even worry about it. Like removing the kid from that situation, as far as like having to deal with those consequences per se, right? Or knowing that you got their back. I think that part is really important. So there wasn't a full question in there, but I think that what you're saying is what's happening when the school is just doing so many crazy things. You got to look at your options. You got to be strategic. Now, some people got means, right? Some people can say, you know what? if my school's going to be doing this might not be the school for us, and they got options. I would say if you got those options and that privilege, then I would say exercise it. If you do not, I think that it's like, okay, well, what can I do? It's in my power. I can go up there. I can be very assertive. I can meet up with other parents. Like, we can have our collective power. We can do some other forms of civil disobedience. We could crash in the school board meeting, or we can raise holy hell. The best parents at the best schools when I was working at the district with Dr. Wilson was, we knew it was certain schools that you not messing with them parents. You just not messing with them. Black, white, Latino, Indian, whatever, right? There were certain schools where there was a pocket of parents, and they ran that thing like it was the Wild West, and they was the sheriff of Nottingham, and they'll let you know real quick, you might be the superintendent, but this is our school. So that is what that exercising looks like. Now, there are definitely some power structures there. There might be some things, if you don't have the type of funds and you can't leave in the middle of the day to be at school, there's always some different type of variables. But ultimately, I am saying, explore your options, be strategic, communicate with your child, over communicate with these people, and nothing is out of bounds for your child.
Yeah, I love that advice. And Sharif, I'd ask you the same kind of question. This isn't like a profound example, but for me, it's an example.
No, it's a real example.
It's a real example. And I'm a reasonably intelligent person that has been talking about this stuff for a long time. And what could happen.
Hey guys, I got a hop, but I just want to make sure I said I didn't want to.
Dr. Cole, thank you so much for thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you too, brother. Come back again.
Yes. I would love to. I would love to. And I'm on the. I know it's changing. I'm on the circuit right now doing trainings for parents about the Black agentic parent. I'll be with Gwen in Connecticut. I think I have Memphis a little bit after that, and then a few other places. So we'll talk about it. But that book is free. The Agentic Black Parent is at charlescole3rd.com.
Perfect.
charlescole3rd.com.
All right. Peace out.
So peace out. So Sharif, what I was about to say was, like, my tendency in a situation like this might be to go from 0 to 1,000, right? Like, there's nothing in between 0 to 1,000 on this particular issue. Like, my thing is like, what do you mean you can't go to the bathroom? Saying to my kid, when they tell me about these rules at school, mine isn't to like take a measured response. It's to like go straight to justice, right? Like justice. Right? There's no half step to justice. So. I mean, and I think it's real, and it's real that to go from 0 to 1,000, because you're already frustrated with these systems, period, just in general, just because you even have to be in them. So what would you say?
And you've been in them, and then you got to, like, it's yeah. I think each situation and each child is different, but I think there's a overall, like, kind of orientation that there's, that I think is important to model for our children as well, that, like, hey, there's some things that we are going to address. And I think we lay all the options on the table, like what's best. And usually it's not a single approach that gets things done. I wish it were, more simpler, but listen, something like that, I think, one, informing them, and you got to know your kid, right? There's some kids saying, and I listen, I agree. Like, I mean, the embarrassment and the humiliation that could occur if a child goes to the bathroom on themselves because they were forced to stay in a room, like that can be devastating emotionally, psychologically, and etc. Right? Like, and so, understanding that and pushing and changing the narrative, like that may be an open, a letter to the school board, it is definitely warrants conversation, not just with you, because I'm sure you're not the only parent that feels like this is, physiologically oppressive. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? Like, and then and we're talking about middle school. We're talking about hormonal changes of young ladies and just everything. Like, it doesn't match into, and when you put that in context of all the other things, restrictions, like that's not where kids thrive. That's not how kids thrive and learn and achieve at the highest degree. So it's almost like they're undermining. And so when you create those type of structures, you're actually causing less cooperation in community in so many ways, even though they're saying, like, this is what they're doing. And I think everybody's not designed for middle school, man. Middle school is where I started. And I hear people complain about middle school, like, all the time. And unfortunately, if you have that type of, mentality, it is going to be extremely hard. And I agree with Michelle Johnson, like being able to build community and culture and cooperation in a classroom, is one. When I was teaching, I would say like, hey, we're not abusing the bathroom thing. Because yes, we had some students who would, but that wasn't, you build systems that are designed for the best of your children, not the folks who you feel like are going to take advantage, right? And then the ones who may take advantage, those are the conversations that you have. That's the relationship that you build. That's the helping them connect the dots. Like, hey, when you're not here, we miss you. Like, we need your voice, and you're missing stuff that you need, like contributing and learning type of thing. But I think just culture of a classroom and a school is so important. And I think sometimes we go the wrong way. We're trying to solve for one thing, we actually exacerbate it in so many different ways.
Yeah, there's two things at play, I think, in that. One, sometimes school goes too much down the harsh path of discipline, and sometimes they go to the too lenient path.
Sometimes it's
of discipline,
nothing,
right?
yeah.
And sometimes
it's not even leniency. It's just like we don't give a right. Like what y'all do, y'all don't deserve,
And that's about them. That's about them managing everybody. But as a parent, you're just managing one child, and you're putting, one or two, or how many kids you have.
Yeah,
you're not thinking about all that. That's their problem. So what happens, I think, in this case, is that the so-called good kids start blaming the so-called bad kids for the oppressive rules that are put into place. So if you were to ask my kids about the reason why some of these things are being put into place, they will tell you that it's because of
so they do it X,
they
Y,
could probably
Z.
even name the kids, and then you're sitting there as a parent, you're following along with that. So now you're blaming the behavior of the so-called bad kids for these type of changes or whatnot. As a parent, I don't know that changes the system at all. You just mentioned Michelle Johnson. She had this quote here, just for listeners and watchers. She says, it's a reasonable rule to tell kids not to ask to go to the bathroom during direct instruction, but they can go during the independent practice portion of the lesson. And Michelle Johnson is very smart. She knows what she's talking about when it comes to education. So I'm not poo-pooing, ironically, literally, what she's saying here. But what I am saying is, yes, that makes sense, because there are going to be kids that raise their hand every 5 minutes and want to go to the bathroom or whatnot. What you said, Sharif, is true, is you can't make all the rules around controlling the people that abuse, the rules or whatnot. You need some different strategies for them, because there will come the period or the time where I just have to go.
Yeah.
Right? I just have to go to the restroom, and I don't care whether it's direct instruction or whatever.
Like, and I may hold it, but like it's just like that's like being in a car. And I always say, go to the bathroom before we leave.
Yeah.
Inevitably, whether they do or don't doesn't mean that 30 minutes in that they're not going to have to go. And so for me to say, you know what, I'm not stopping, right? Like to me, that doesn't make it a great trip, especially if they're stressed or they relieve themselves in a car. Like none of this makes it better. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like so many other factors that would need to be looked into. Like, yeah, I get the DI part, and in general, like what we want our students to be able to do is to a degree to begin to self-manage and understand like, hey, all right, when's the best time for me to go to the bathroom? Maybe it's during transition. Maybe it's after the day. And like, yes. And challenging like, hey, this is a part where they start to say like, hey, I don't want to miss that part. That's the most important part of the, of the lesson. Right. Like, and I want them to know, but look, if you got to go, let me know like, hey, this can I need to go. Right. Like, and so just even having that, understand, but that's how you build community, right? Like that's the cooperation and the community that is supposed to be engineered in a learning environment to make it the most conducive for us all to learn, adults as well. So
you sometimes you just said regulation, or self-regulation, which I think is really important. Sometimes you rob kids of their ability to be self-regulating if you put too many kind of things in place that removes their ability to make decisions, right?
Yeah, why do I need to think and be strategic about my day if it's just like,
if it's like prison, if it's like all, you're going to tell me when to eat, you're going to tell me when to use the restroom, you're going to take recess away from me, those things. Well, listen, we've spent a lot of time on this particular example, but to zoom out a little bit, we have 8 million kids. Let's keep talking about them. They're going to schools at the beginning of the school year. And what do we hope for them for this year that's realistic? We're not going to solve every problem for them. They're not going to so-called catch up this year. But there are some realistic things that we collectively can be hoping for this year. And I'll just, give an example. I hope that we really focus on them this year with data and with expectations, right? Because the pandemic robbed them of a lot of ground that they had gained over time. And now they're starting from a starting point where everybody is. It's not just a group of kids, but everybody kind of is needing for the powers that be to be really focused, not on all the politics and all the crazy stuff, but specifically on the outcomes, the data, So how do we collectively hope for our kids, but not just hope, but really be planful and thinking about what we want for our kids this year? It's a big question. It's a long question, but when you think about this year, what are you thinking and hoping goes right for kids this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. I mean, one, I hope they all have just great teachers, man. Just teachers who care about them and who are cared about, right? Like I think teachers who are cared about are more likely to be in a space to plan well, to research well, to look at data well, and to deliver lessons well. Look, my fourth grader doesn't have a teacher yet. They have a substitute. And I'm actually thinking about pulling her out because I'm like, no, they're like, oh, somebody will be in October. I'm like, a month? Hell no. Like this is code red, and I realized like that's the experience of so many students, throughout the year. Now they say they have a teacher coming and something they, before they can transfer, they have to do an X amount of time or whatever. But I'm like, why wasn't all that taken care of last year? Like, you know what I mean? What the heck? So one, the amount of vacancies that still may occur in certain districts, particularly in districts that our students go to, our children go to, can be high. And what happens is typically another teacher who is there will have to cover. And so you imagine when you're trying to plan, but you can't plan because you got to cover. That go on for weeks and weeks. That can add. I've heard last year there was some, and every year, but it was intensified the past couple of years, as you mentioned, the pandemic, where students had no teachers. So 3 or 4 classes would just be brought into the auditorium. And this happened weekly for months. Right. And so one, I hope just the stability, the consistency of instruction happens, and then at a high level. Then the second thing, I hope that I agree with you as far as students being centered, their literacy, their mental health, their aspirations, right? Like all of those, I hope it really, really centered, and not in a way where people are like, oh, I can't teach you because I just got to hug you. Oh, you can't learn because this is everything. The world is on fire, so I can't really push you and challenge you. Not that type. They're like, hey, we got a lot of work to do, and I'm here to support you. I'm going to have high expectations and high levels of support. Like, here's the bar, but I'll be there after school to help you to navigate this. Like, just those kind of things is what I really, really hope can happen for more and more and more of our 8 million Black children.
A lot of what we're talking about right now, what I see kind of from these comments, could form the basis of a kitchen table conversation with our kids. So instead of talking to kids about, I think just do your best and all that type of stuff, or what we have called the talk with Black students or Black children has been the talk about the police and how to stay alive or whatnot. That's what we've called the talk. I don't think that's the talk. I think that might be a module of a talk. But I think when it comes to school, it could be as clear as a kitchen table discussion with your kids around even like this comment from Vita. I've noticed a lot of black and brown schools are focused on kids just following orders, not necessarily learning how to navigate, self regulate, and make executive decisions. Michelle Johnson follows that up with a quote that says, "You can facilitate the ability of students to self regulate and make executive decisions by creating space for it." These two quotes, our children are intelligent enough to make these the basis of a talk with them. Listen, you are going into a system. We put you in these systems not because we believe that they're going to get it all right, but it's because this is what we do. We have a relationship with the district, with the schools. You're part of that relationship. We are entrusting you to them. But the talk should be, these are things that you can look out for. You are smart enough to understand what I am saying to you. And right now, like what Vita says, I'm just going to be honest with you about your schools. Oftentimes, they are trying to control black and brown students, and they're focusing more on you just following orders and not necessarily how to learn, self-regulate, whatnot. That could be the talk. Like that could be part of the talk with your kid. Everything that we've said so far today, like paying attention to whether or not teachers are really keying in on your ability, rather than just always keying in on your so-called inability or supposed inability. And what Michelle said, that could be part of the talk with your kids. These things aren't above them, right? Like this could form the basis for reality setting for your kids this year. Yes, do your best. Black people have heard this for years of, if you be a street sweeper, be the best street sweeper you can be, whatever. I heard that growing up and whatnot. So always do your best and whatever. Those type of pieces of advice still make sense, but get more specific. Like get more kind of specific about the systems that you're putting in so that they can, the cognition starts, right? You have implanted the cognition to watch out. This is the school version of stay woke, right? I'm going to tell you what to be aware of. And part of that is, how do you study? How do you participate in school, in class? What your behavior should be. You said it earlier, what our expectations are, whatnot. I personally don't think that I do enough of what I'm saying right now, to set aside specific time to specifically go over this with my kids and specifically say these things rather than just dropping little nuggets to them over time. This could be like a father lesson, like sitting at the table saying, listen, I got like 5 things to tell you right now. It's my job to tell you what I'm about to tell you. The reality of your school is X, and fill in the blank with all these things that people have said today in the comments of, like a realistic understanding of what, the school and the system, but this is how the game is played, right? Yeah. I'm sure Michelle Johnson, who's in our comments, Michelle Johnson, you would have more advice than that about like talking to your kids about the ways in which they could actually be successful in the school. They can navigate it, self-regulate, and be in charge of themselves and succeed. And I think that should be the talk that we have with our Black kids.
Yeah. I definitely want to touch base on that. And those 2 quotes, I mean, it's something I struggle with as a young educator, and I think I evolved. And I think it's so much that comes from like what's your mindset and orientation about Black children, because a lot of that comes into play. Like, why are you pushing and challenging them? Is it to police them, or is it because like, oh, you're capable of XYZ, right? You know what I mean? And like, how can you push the Jackson 5 to be great without being abusive? Right? Like, I think that's
Joe Jackson.
Yeah, without being Joe Jackson, right? Like, or Joe, the guy from Jersey, who wasn't like that in real life, but they made the movie, Joe Clark, right?
Joe Clark, yeah.
Joe might be like, just maybe it's the Joes. Don't be Joe. You know what I mean? Like, so, but like, how do you do that? Because I remember as a classroom teacher, I mean, the kids would say like, I was hard on them, but they also knew that I absolutely loved them, and I would do whatever I could for them, right? And they still have this, we have this bond still. And I was still learning, and it took me a while to like kind of like, all right, where can I soften up? And not lower the expectation, but just color it a little bit, differently, right? And so I think, so here's an example. So my high school daughter, they have a study hall. right? And sometimes these are like free periods in like during the day. And sometimes because they have this lettered scheduling, it might be twice a day in some weeks, right? Like, we're just like, in my head, I would say, and they always say, like, I know you say you wish you were the principal. I'm like, man, if I was a principal, ain't no way in the world you just sitting there for 50 minutes playing on your phone. And the school thing is like, well, let them do, like, it's okay, like, whatever. And my thing is like the sense of urgency that we have, like, you should be crack a book, solve a problem, do something, right? Like, I mean, that would be my sense of urgency about every moment in space. And I get like there's like, well, kids need mental health, and I'm just like, it's 180 days. There's only a certain amount of time. And the barriers that you're gonna face, you have no time to be chilling. You know what I mean? And so like that's something I struggle. I still, I'm sure sometimes I'm coming on the wrong side of it as an educator, even as a father. But it's something to think about. But I think the orientation around mindsets about the children and and love for them and their aspirations, I think that has to fuel it and feed it and inform it, but also sometimes constrain it in a way and make sure like, hey, no, loosen up, because that's not how I went to school. Like we went to a very they self-control, self-discipline was a big part. Our Nguza Saba, the principles in Guzasaba, where that was our value system in the school. And so it was constantly like it was high level of urgency and we had a lot of fun. Like, you know what I mean? So it was like they found that mixture and balance where people will look at it today and be like, oh my gosh, that's the most militant school that we ever heard of. Like, nah, like, but I don't want to get into anything like we're all fine, we're doing great, at the same time. But sometimes I just wonder, like, there's a balance that has to be, and it's not easy. There's no simple way of doing it. But
yeah,
my kids are glad I'm not their principal because they know like a lot of that stuff that
it'd
I'm
be
just
tough.
like, yeah, I'm like, hell no, like that's no, you don't get a free period during the day. Like we're here to hard work. Like you got, what I mean? You got stuff to
I'm not
do.
going to your school. I'm out of your school. I quit your school. So Demetria Giles says, I would add talking to our children about how they can take control of their own learning in and outside of school. Excuse me. I think this is really important because we don't talk enough to our children about learning. We talk to them about school and about grades and about, test scores or whatever, but we don't really tell them about metacognition, about this is how the learning process works. What I've noticed for college students are that there are a lot of advice out there for how to take notes, how to succeed in the classroom. There's a million YouTube videos on how to survive a lecture and all that stuff. And I think that's like part of that's part of like the preparation that we should be more specific with our kids about some of these things. Listen, kid, I'm gonna just tell you. Let's stop talking about for school for a second. Just talk about how the brain works, how information works, how learning works, and how it's your job. This is your development, your job to actually be the captain of that. I do have a question for you because you mentioned something here about like you would be a different type of parent and principal, and your kids know that, and that's probably why they're like me. They wouldn't want to go to your school because it would be too crazy. But do you believe in punishment? Do you believe like bad grades require punishment, and bad reports from schools and bad information from schools, require consequences at home? And by consequences, I mean some form of punishment.
Yeah, depending on what it is, age appropriate, developmentally appropriate. Like, yeah, like I think it's consequences for in life. It doesn't stop because it's school, right? Like I think that's a natural way of learning, but I strongly believe in natural consequences, but as well as, like privileges, like earning privilege for something, so I try to do it on the flip side, like, hey, here's the thing, and you earn more based off of your output, because I feel like that's closer to like optimal living kind of thing. But yeah, like I mean, as a principal, like yeah, like if your kid was doing whatever, something crazy in the school that was not only inconsistent with your values that you've expressed, but also our values. And as an ecosystem, it was inconsistent. Like, yeah, like the expectation would be. And I'm not saying like, oh, it has to be X, Y, Z, but yeah, it all depends. Like maybe it's a conversation, the first time. Maybe it is loss of, I don't know, whatever technology thing. I think that I draw the line in some spaces. Not draw the line. I just like when we were kids, one of the things that something I did something, my mom would call the high school and be like, "Hey, wrestling coach, he can't compete." I don't
Mm-hmm.
agree with that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
agree with that. Pulling them off of activities and learning experiences. And she was like, "Look, that was the only thing that you would that really got your attention. Tell the football coach he can't play." I mean, that kind of thing. But in general, like, yeah, I do think that having consequences as well as reward, not just consequence, like, oh, well, you're doing what you're supposed to do anyway, so I ain't going to do that. Oh, you're out of line. Now I'm going to but everything has a balance. Everything has context. Um, and yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
real life has those kind of rewards and consequences. But in general, I think that the more that the home and school are on the same page, um and if the school gave a consequence, I don't know if home also has to give a consequence. And if home,
Mm-hmm.
right, like, and I think that's where the communication is, like so here's one thing, and it's not directly related, but I'll share it because I think it's tangentially. So my mother used to say that um well, her and my father, like, she would say, like, both parents shouldn't be, like, yelling at the kid at the same time, even if they did something terrible. Right? Like there should be, if one is going to like kind of met out the consequences, the other one should just be a safe space to listen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, so it's
Mm-hmm.
just, she was like, and when I thought about that as now she was sharing this with me as a parent, because I didn't realize that as a kid. I was like, oh, like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it was never like, the two, yeah, that kind of thing. It was like, if one is doing that, the other one should just be there. Not to say they agree with the parent, like the other parent, but the child always needs somewhere where they feel like, that's why parents, kids be like, I got to go to grandma's house if something's like they're trying to find someone to still have just a connection with. Because when adults are angry with kids, the thing that happens sometimes is they feel like their connection is broken.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? They feel like I'm not loved. I made a bad mistake, but I feel like I'm unloved right now. And
Mm-hmm.
she said it was so important for kids to always still have this connection and know that they're, and with someone. And they're like, it's optimal if it can be in the same house, if
Yeah.
not to be able to do it with other family members. And we know this kind of like essentially as communal people, but it's also important to know it clearly, like, hey, this is a strategy to help help guide and the child, but not break them.
I
Right.
think
Like, and I
you're
think
real.
sometimes the punishments are trying to break kids.
Well, it's it's the slavery thing. It's the slavery mentality of like, you did something wrong, I'm gonna whip you, I'm gonna beat you.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
the softer beating is I'm gonna take stuff from you. Like I think I understand where that came from. And what I also think now is that young people are changing in that they're willing to lose everything for stuff that they don't care about. Right.
Yeah.
So the problem isn't that I have a cell phone or a screen or whatnot. That's not the reason I got a bad grade in math. So you could take that stuff away from me and I'm just gonna be like, I still don't like that class. I still don't like that teacher, whatnot. In a way that in my generation we wouldn't have. We would have straightened up to get our Atari back. Right. We wanted to
Mhm.
sit there and be playing Atari all
For
day.
all the
Whatnot.
lucky people that had Atari and didn't
Yeah.
just get to play it when they visited
Uh,
someone.
yeah, visiting that cousin where the parent had a good job.
Listen,
But I think it's getting more complicated to be able to think about this thing about rewards and punishment and intrinsic motivation. Like, what are your kids naturally motivated to do? And is the problem really that they have too many things and so that's why you start taking things away? That really, honestly, I'm starting to think more about this, doesn't really solve the problem. Young people uh, they have more willingness, I think, now than before to just be okay with like losing some things, and that doesn't really solve the problem. I think at the end of the show, I think all of this is really important for us to Be smart and planful about everything you said about being a partner to the school, about having a good school home relationship, about being your kid's first teacher at home. I think some of the things I was thinking about as we talked today was being more explicit with kids about the things you think that, that we may think is above their head, but it's really not. Like about like what is learning? How does the brain work? How will you be treated at school? There was in the comments here, some folks talked about the study where Black boys are singled out for the gaze, the gaze of like attention on them because they're being looked at for there being a problem. Just talked about this, I don't know, on another podcast, just talked about this, the study that everybody's been passing around where the teachers were told, look at this video of kids sitting at a table and find the ones that are committing infractions or bad behavior. The video didn't show any infractions or bad behavior, but what it was a test. They were testing where the eyes of the person would go, who they were looking at. And the table had like a white boy, a white girl, a black girl, and a black boy, I think. And every teacher's, black and white, trained their gaze on the black boy. Their eyeballs went over to him and they found infractions, even though there were no infractions in the video. So what that tells you is they were looking for it and they found it, even though it didn't exist. And in the other kids, they weren't looking for it. So there could have been some infractions on that side, but their eyeballs were trained towards the black kids. I think that's something you can talk to your children about. It's science-based, it's research-based, it's reality, it's them. It affects them. So, kitchen table conversations can get more sophisticated than what I'm doing right now.
You can show that to, you can, depend on the kid's age, you can show that and share that research with them. And yeah, I think those type of robust conversations are so important, right? Like, and, it arms them with understanding of how to navigate in the space as well, right? So it's just like, it gives them language for things. So instead of like, teacher picking on me, teacher picking on me, teacher picking on, like they can't, like, sometimes they can't necessarily put the word, they don't know exactly what it is. And sometimes they can't really describe it. And so it becomes this, even high schoolers just like, oh, they don't like me. It's just like, and we would coach them like, well, what about it? Like, what example, like explain how you feel, right? And it was sometimes really hard to get them to kind of just share how they're experiencing it. They just coin it in this, oh, the teacher don't like me. You know what I mean? And that's it, which is hard for them to problem solve. But it was hard for us to also problem solve and support, right? And so the more language they have about it, because again, it's like this higher degree, it's like vocabulary, right? We say like, oh, don't gaga goo goo babies. You know what I mean? Actually use words. Right. And the same thing as kids get older, like to give them, as they emotionally mature, to match our language and our conversation. This is, I appreciate it, man. This is a great reminder for me that you just gave. If I can keep these in my ear, even just how I'm, conversing with my 3 still school age kids, high school and elementary. I think it's fantastic to elevate our conversations.
Challenge.
That's my homework. I appreciate that.
Right. And I think it should be all of our homework. Our challenge at the end of this conversation today, as we wrap up, I think really is to realize we don't have it all figured out. To have homework, like what you just said, to have some homework on what we should do. All this sounds good on a podcast and all this sounds great, in a conversation like this. But the reality of it is operationalizing it could require some steps. Like, I could think more about, I keep saying this kitchen table conversation, but a formalized way of making sure that they know when we do this, it's to cover information. That's what this time is for. We're going to take 15 minutes here so that we start learning. This is your learning session with your father, or your parent. And I need to go through some things. Hey guys, I talked to a whole bunch of people this week about some studies, and I think you're smart enough to understand what the studies are saying. So let me simplify it for you. And then I want you to tell me back, does this make sense to you, and how does it show up in your real life at school? On your example that you just gave, kids will often just say she's mean, or or she don't like me, or whatever. And what you can train your kids to do is to stop saying those things and start just jumping to the examples. Instead of saying she's mean, say, whenever I raise my hand, she never picks me, but she always picks this other person, and blah blah blah. Now you're getting specific. Now your kid is looking out for details and specific. things to bring to the table.
Absolutely. And that's why I always, encourage families to ask children about how they experience school. Not just like, hey, what happened in
Mm-hmm.
school today, but how did you experience? Meaning, like asking those, the more specific we are in questions, the more specific answers that we can attain. We say, like, hey, how was school today? Oh, good, bad, whatever. Oh, what'd you learn? Oh, nothing, or this or that, right? It was just like, when did in which classroom do you feel the most challenged? Like which teacher makes you
Mm-hmm.
feel the best about yourself? Which, you're at because you're asking about experiences and you're getting to know your child even more, right? Like, what, like when do you laugh the most when you're in school, right? Like just asking questions, with more specifics kind of starts a conversation. And that conversation can just continue through a lifetime, right? If we just add more, but I think sometimes we're so fast paced and we're just like, boo, 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 it's more of a drive-by check-in, but
Mm.
instead of like a deep, and that's the human relationships in general, right? And so I think the more we can do that, and a great way to practice it, is with the children, particularly if you don't have a child. I got one child that's just, she won't let anybody else get a word in about, she'll just go. But, for the ones who may be, more reluctant to kind of share about their experiences, just asking those probing questions, just ask three probing questions
Mm.
about how they experience school, when they feel their best, when they feel a challenge, when did they felt uncomfortable, when were they nervous, throughout the course of a week. That gives them more and more stuff to, to talk about and think about.
I appreciate that. This is a good place to stop. This has been, I think, a great conversation that we need to have at the beginning of the school year. How do we wish for, hope for, and get planful about making sure that our kids have the best year that they can have this year? What should the adults be
Mhm.
doing to make sure that they actually succeed in a way that they haven't, last year, the last few years, or many years? One of the things I think is that came up in this show is like one, starting with the fact that we believe they deserve it and that our people are deserving of a real education and a better education.
Mhm.
The second part is arming them with a sense of agency. Like, no, you can make the world different. You can make, this is how learning works. You can understand it, and I'm going to help you understand it because you're intelligent. So, talking to our young people as agentic, intelligent people rather than as people that need to be fixed in some
Mhm.
form of way. It's just an attitude shift that we have with our young people. This thing around the
Mhm.
punishment of Black children and Black boys specifically, but Black girls are getting punished too. Maybe we start taking punishment off the table as the primary emotion that we feel with how we're raising our kids, and we replace it with, someone put empathy and compassion in the comments earlier. And I don't think that what we do a lot of times looks like empathy and compassion. I think it looks a little bit like slavery. Like, I
Mhm.
told you X, that sort of thing. So maybe we drop that this year. And then, my final thing that I'll say that came up in this show that we should all be talking about is our relationship with the schools that we put them in is a neutral relationship. It could go bad, or it could go really well. We have a part to play in it going bad or it going really well, but there's an expectation that we will be somehow engaged with it because we're putting our kids there. And there will come a time where you need to hold the system accountable for what they're supposed to be doing, not just what you want them to do or whatnot, but you pay taxes for these schools. They're supposed to be doing a certain set of things, and you should be watching out to make sure that those certain set of things are happening. As always, we appreciate you guys giving your time on Fridays. This has been another episode of Freedom Friday. We're glad that Dr. Cole was able to make it with us, and he'll be back again, I'm sure.
Yes, yes, yes.
And we'll, we'll keep having these conversations until they're unnecessary. And I think that's going to be a little while. So thank you for all the feedback and the content that you put into the comments today. You always make the show better by doing that, and you kind of push us on our thinking. If you have any thoughts or ideas about how we can make the show better, just go ahead and ping us online here. You can get to me on Twitter or Facebook at Citizen Stewart, and it's the same across all socials. Would love to hear from you about anything that you think that we could be talking about, or topics or issues that we should bring up and be more planful about. We appreciate you as always. Have a great weekend and be prepared to have a great week next week. Let's get all